Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Of course, I'm still doing the top albums of the year countdown, and now we are into the top 10. And again, if you didn't watch the previous videos, I can tell you that there are 35 albums that I loved out of the 200 plus that were probably sent to me this year. Putting this list together was not easy. In fact, I go back and I listen to all of these albums, over the course of the last few weeks, just to really see where I'm at with them and where I'm going to rank them. And when you get into the top 10, first of all, getting to the into the 35 list alone means you put out a really amazing record. But at the same time, when you get into the top 10, for me, it becomes much harder to rank these albums. So this top 10 list was one of the more difficult ones that I've ever had to rank, and it starts right here. So with that being said, number 10 is Megadeth, The Sick, The Dying, The Dead. And this is an album where the expectations for me were sky high because I loved Dystopia. Megadeth is probably one of, if not my favorite big four band, along with Anthrax. And so I loved Dystopia. So the expectations for me were pretty high. And, Megadeth really didn't exceed the expectations, but they definitely met them. And Dave Mustaine, the one thing that he's always been able to do really well is to write a riff in a guitar riff that'll catch you and bring you into a song. And from the moment this album starts, the first riffs of the first song on the album, it grabbed me from there. And the album has been signature Megadeth all the way, very well written. In fact, this and Dystopia are probably some of the better releases Dave Mustaine and company have put out in quite a while. So I love this album. It's definitely in at number 10. If you love Megadeth, you're definitely going to love this one. Number 9. And 9 is a pretty special album to me because this I consider one of the greatest comeback albums ever. Just like the Skid Row album I talked about in one of the previous videos, this band is a band that I have been hoping would put out an album someday, and they finally did it. And that is Toxic, and that is the album Dysmorta. And Toxic is, to me, one of the most unique thrash metal bands from a songwriting perspective I have ever heard. In fact, I first encountered them way back in the day. When I would do my radio show, I would go and play public service shows after the radio show. So while those were playing, I would go into the record library and I would listen to music. I would listen to other bands. And so I found World Circus and Think This, and I would listen to them in the production room. Now, at the time, these albums were out of print, so the only time I could listen to this band was when I went to the station to listen to them on the turntable in the production room. Well, then Metal Minded put out a couple reissues of the first two Toxic albums, and when all of these thrash metal albums or thrash metal bands started putting albums out again, I was like, man, I really hope Toxic really does put an album out someday. And boy, they did. And man, I'll tell you what, it is definitely one of the best thrash metal releases I've ever heard, much less this year. So Toxic, it is absolutely, positively just, they put out an amazing album. And there was, of course, an interview up with Josh Christian on my channel right now. You can go check out. A lot of enthusiasm. If you think I'm enthusiastic about talking about this new album, Josh Christian is even more enthusiastic about bringing this band back. So if you want some positivity, go check that interview out. It's very good. And Toxic comes in at number 9 with Dysmorta. Number 8 on the list, this shouldn't surprise anybody with me, Stratovarius, still one of my favorite power metal bands of all time, and definitely a band I really got into during that golden age of European power metal between, like the mid-90s through the early 2000s. And I like their newer sound. In fact, I think their newer sound after Timo Tolkki left, to me, is the best era of the band. Even though I like Timo Tolkki a lot, I think he's a great guitar player, I was a little skeptical when he was gone and they were going to put out Polaris. I was kind of like, man, what are these guys doing? And they really, Polaris probably is my least favorite of the new era, as we call it, but definitely it was still solid. And the last 3 albums Stratovarius has put out have been great. So with that being said, Survive is no different. It's very good, and I found myself listening to it quite a bit. So number 8, Stratovarius with Survive. Number 7 on the list, you'll see an interview about this album, and that is A to Z, which is a new band, and it was formed by Mark Zonder, who, a longtime drummer, played in Warlord, played in Fates Warning, played in a lot of different really cool projects out there. And Zonder he was a great interview. So you could see that interview on the channel. It's actually up there. We talk a lot about this release. To me, it's a flawless album. The songs are catchy. The production is near perfect. Ray Alder sounds great because he sings on this as well. And for those that don't know who Ray Alder is, he sang in Redemption and of course is most famous for singing in Fate's Warning. So this entire record, flawless. Not much else to say about it except that it's catchy and has great songs. And Mark Zonder being a drummer, drum sound is one of those things that's really hard to nail, and his drums sound amazing. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to the next album and last album on this video that I'm going to talk about. And it was an early contender for Album of the Year. And I'll give you a hint. This guy, his solo album previous to this was the #1 album of the year in 2018 on the Metal Command show. So it is Michael Romeo of Symphony X with the solo album War of the Worlds Part 2. And man, you know, this is why it was so hard to rank these, because this easily could have probably been #1. But there were some other albums I liked a little bit better, but this is definitely not only an improvement over War of the Worlds Part 1, but the singer's a little bit different. He sounds a lot more like Russell Allen than the previous guy they had singing in the band. And Michael Romeo, to me, one of the most underrated guitar players in heavy metal. I'm shocked this guy does not get more notoriety than he does, but he is a phenomenal songwriter. Mike LaPond and I, in our interview, we do talk about a little bit about how underrated he actually is and how great of a songwriter he actually is. And Michael Romeo is great. So definitely deserves to be in that top 10. Just barely did not crack the top 5. And with that being said, I will be back with the top 5 albums of the year list in the next video. It's going to be fun. I'm really excited to bring that list to you because these are 5 records that really blew me away this year. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.